Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam, and today we will be starting a new video series for the 2023 college football season called Quick Previews, or as I will affectionately call this series, Quick Picks. Just make sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy today's video as I preview 10 different matchups that I have not already made predictions for throughout the week. Let's get down to the business, but before we do, make sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date for college football previews, reactions, analysis, and so much more. Check out my Patreon and the link in the description if you haven't already. But more importantly than that, comment your thoughts on this week down below, any upsets you think are going to brew, and like this video so we can get it into the algorithm. Up first, we're going to be going in order of the date and time that these games begin, will be Florida State traveling on the road to face Boston College. My score for this game will be Florida State 38, Boston College 7. The only thing that's going for Boston College here in my mind is the fact that it's on the road. Florida State will be traveling quite a distance and they'll be in a different environment. Tallahassee, Florida, as compared to Boston, Massachusetts. So they'll be traveling quite a distance. And Florida State next week is going to take the road to play Clemson, a rivalry game and a team that the Seminoles have not beaten since 2014. So we know, and I think most know, that Mike Norvell is looking at that Clemson game, and that's the next mountaintop to climb. You cannot overlook Boston College. I don't think Florida State will overlook them enough to where the Eagles will be a threat. And the Eagles stink this year. They only beat Holy Cross 31-28. They lost to Northern Illinois, who then proceeded to, blow their own diaper and lose to Southern Illinois in week 2. Meanwhile, Florida State has blown out LSU. They've beaten Southern Miss, and they held Frank Gore Jr. to a very low yards per carry average and very low total rushing yards. So Florida State's run defense, in my mind, after facing LSU and then a great elite group of 5 running back, I think it's safe to say that their rush defense has been fixed. Their defense is solid. Their offense is great. They're favored by 26, which is a massive spread to cover, but I think they cover it with a 38-7 win on the road in Alumni Stadium. Trey Benson will have around 100 rushing yards. This game is a trap spot for Florida State, but they will control the game and they'll get out with a win and prepare for Clemson this entire week, a game in which, despite Clemson's shortfalls and getting humiliated by Duke, I still think will be a great week 4 matchup that I'm definitely spending 20, 30, or maybe even 40 minutes of my time previewing next week. Boston College, another interesting fact, they have allowed more total yards than they have forced on opponents. Meanwhile, Florida State is so far gaining over 500 yards per game. This is a total mismatch in favor of the Seminoles. They're going to come out with a big win, and they're one of the best teams in college football right now. Up next, we have the Louisiana State Bayou Bengals taking the road in Starksville to play at Davis Wade Stadium. LSU is favored by 9.5. 9.5 points, and many like Mississippi State here, and that's understandable. And full disclosure, I'm more of a Big Ten guy, so if for the SEC I get something wrong, I'm personally not going to be surprised. I don't want to pretend like I'm an expert on the SEC. Am I knowledgeable? Yes. Am I an elite person with SEC games? No. But from what I see, and I think I'm right here, LSU is pissed. They hate that Florida State humiliated them and beat them to a pulp in that neutral site game in the Camping World Stadium. And I think that LSU will be firing on all cylinders for the rest of the year. That doesn't mean they win out, because winning at Bryant-Denny Stadium is going to be hard. Beating Texas A&M, beating Auburn, even going on the road and beating Mississippi State is going to be tough. They have a gauntlet of a schedule, and even if they win out, they're likely going to have to face Georgia in the SEC championship game, which will be a rough win for LSU to have. But I think the Tigers will rush for around 100 yards. They'll pass for likely more than 300 yards. I think they cover the spread here. They're frustrated. Jaden Daniels, I think, is a quarterback who will learn from his mistakes against Florida State. And more importantly than that, he didn't have the supporting cast needed to achieve at his highest level against Florida State. Florida State had a total trench advantage. It was clear by the end of the game, although murky earlier in the game. And LSU's secondary is vulnerable. But after a game against Grambling in which they struggled early, they piled on 72 points. And I like Mississippi State's defensive line. They have a good run game, and Will Rogers is a talented quarterback. But I think that LSU is too good of a team here to not just lose, but to not beat Mississippi State by double digits. I think LSU will announce to the world that maybe they're not a top 5 team. In my opinion, definitely not. But they're certainly top 15. And more likely than not, they're, number 11, 12, 13, not 14 or 15 after this week, potentially in the top 10. I think LSU is too good to lose here, so I'm taking them to win and to cover. They're going to be mad, and I expect that game at Alabama, despite no longer being an undefeated matchup of any sorts, to still be a good game, and definitely a battle and must-see TV. Up next, we have Kansas State and the Fighting Chris Clemons taking the road against Missouri. This right here, if you're Eli Drinkwitz, this is the game to prove yourself. You have a good defense. You have Luther Burden III, who is one of the better wide receivers in the SEC. You have Brady Cook, who, while he isn't a good or great quarterback, he has legs, he has a dynamic skill set to some degree, and you're at home. Kansas State has to travel to Farrett Field. They're not hosting the Tigers here. Kansas State's only favored by 4 points, and this game's expected to be close. I think it will be a defensive battle. Kansas State has questions in their secondary and some questions along the defensive line as well, but Missouri has questions all around on offense. Remember, they lost Dominic Lovett to Georgia, and last year they were more of a defensive team than an offensive team. This looks to be the case this season as they only scored, I believe, 23 points on Middle Tennessee State, only winning 23-19 and only scoring 35 points against South Dakota. They're definitely a team with a better defense than an offense. They're only allowing 58.5 rushing yards per game. I don't think that Missouri has the quarterback. They have the wide receiver in Luther Burden III. He will certainly be able to take advantage of that secondary from Kansas State. I don't think Brady Cook will be able to be consistent enough to beat that secondary down. Meanwhile, Kansas State has a better quarterback in Will Howard. Their running back, Trayshawn Ward is his name. And then they also have another running back who's emerged in DJ Giddens. I think that Kansas State will be able to control the lines of scrimmage, do what they do, which is have good trench play, solid defense, fundamental football, and that will win Kansas State this game. They have the superior quarterback, the superior trenches. They're the better overall team. Missouri has some advantages. They have the better wide receivers, in my opinion, and they have the home field advantage. But Kansas State overall is the superior football team, so I'm taking them to win in a defensive battle, 24-17. Up next, we have South Carolina taking the road against Georgia. This will be a 3:30 p.m. Eastern time, so we've now passed the noon games. We've missed other noon games that I could have covered, so I guess that little mistake there could have been correct. But Georgia is only favored by 27.5. They have not covered the spread in their first 2 games. They failed to cover against University Tennessee Martin, and they pushed against Ball State, where they were favored by 42, and they ended up winning by 42. Once again, Georgia has a home game. This will be in Sanford Stadium, which recently has been one of the loudest, if not the loudest stadium in college football. They're favored by around 4 touchdowns, and there are people who I think, because whether it's they like Shane Beamer or they don't want to see Georgia just come out and take a sledgehammer to another Power 5 team, they want to see South Carolina win. Or not win, of course, but cover. None of those things are happening. The Dogs open up their conference play with a dominant performance. They have looked bored and uninterested in their past 2 games. I liken their performance in the past 2 games, although it is different, to Michigan's in their first 2 games so far. Those 2 teams, in my mind, are the top 2 teams in the nation. They look bored, uninterested, often play backups, and they're testing out new things, and they're saving their energy for the games that matter. Kirby Smart is going to want to come out and dominate against an SEC opponent. And Spencer Rattler, behind that offensive line, I don't think Spencer Rattler's really good, but he's not the problem. The offensive line of South Carolina allowed 9 sacks to a UNC defense that couldn't get a single sack against Group of 5 Appalachian State. The offensive line stinks, and Georgia is going to abuse the trenches. They're going to get a turnover, and Carson Beck, Brock Bowers, Kendall Milton, Dejon Edwards, Ladd McConkey, who hasn't played yet, but Mekhi Muse, these offensive players are going to score points, get yards. Georgia's one of the best teams in college football right now, if not potentially the best team. I think that them and Michigan are in the top 2, and Georgia has had impressive performances, especially on defense so far. Whether it's Malachi Starks or Michael Williams, they have dogs and NFL players and intelligent players littered everywhere on defense and great coaching. They're better at South Carolina at every position. They're going to win this game big. They're going to cover. I think that people who think otherwise are dreaming, but that's potentially a controversial opinion of mine. Up next, Oregon State hosting Brady Hoke's San Diego State. Oregon State is a big favorite, 24.5 points. However, Oregon State plays the style of football where you could think that they could get in a close, drawn-out battle with inferior teams. Oregon State does not recruit well by standards of the blue chip ratio, and they like to play smash-mouth football, have good defense. They're typically not known for scoring in the even high 30s, 40s, let alone 50s. Well, newsflash, San Jose State University is pretty good. They have Nick Nash at wide receiver, and I forget the name of their quarterback. Shame on me. But they have a good quarterback at San Jose State. I think his name is Devin Chevaro. I know I'm missing the last name, but bear with me. They have good players. And Oregon State beat them 42-17. And then they beat California Davis 55-7. DJ Uiagalelei has resurrected his career. I know it's 2 games in, so that's probably an overreaction, but I don't think it is. He's second in quarterback efficiency, according to ESPN, with a 92.4 QBR. He's thrown for 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, and he's definitely in a system that benefits him. With the number 1 offensive line in college football as of week 2, the Beavers will roll to victory. They will control time of possession, control the lines of scrimmage. Damian Martinez will have a good game, and Uiagalelei once again will have a near-perfect performance. Jonathan Smith is a much better coach than Brady Hoke, and he has more talent, and they're playing at home. Everything here is matching up well for Oregon State to win and cover. Trust me, for these quick picks, these matchups will get better as the weeks go on. Week 3 is pretty weak, all things considered. For matchups, although there are some more intriguing games we'll get to later in the video, but many of the games that had upset potential, I did cover earlier in the week, and a lot of those involved Big Ten teams, whether Michigan State and Washington or Penn State, Illinois. You can browse my channel and find those videos if you're curious, and I would encourage you to do so. But anyway, Western Michigan travels to play the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, a theme so far in this video has been the team who's favored wins and covers big time. They've all been blowouts. While Iowa will dominate this game at home, I don't think they cover. They're favored by 28 points, and Iowa hasn't scored 28 points yet, and their defense, in my mind, has clearly taken a step back compared to last year. They won against Iowa State basically because of a pick 6, but they allowed 14 points to Utah State, and they allowed 13 to Iowa State. And with some injuries, especially to Cade McNamara, their quarterback who's suffering from a quad injury, and the fact that Iowa has a game against Penn State next week, I think that Kirk Ferentz is going to be wise. He wants Caleb Johnson, Cade McNamara, Eric All, Seth Anderson, and then on defense, Cooper DeJean, Nick Jackson, Deontay Craig. He wants his starters healthy and rested as much as possible. Iowa defensively has been allowing more yards than their offense has produced. Their defense is allowing 305 yards. Their offense is only producing 259.5. Meanwhile, Western Michigan has been running for over 200 yards, passing for around 200. I think Western Michigan gets a touchdown here, and Iowa likely pulls their starters the minute they're up by 3 touchdowns, or maybe by 24 points. So Western Michigan covers, Iowa dominates, but Brian Ferentz, despite needing to average 25 points per game, he hasn't done that in his first 2 games against some of the easiest opponents he'll have all season. So I like Iowa, but I like Western Michigan to cover. I really like them here, and I think that's a wise thing. The spread has been growing too. It was at one point, I think, at 27 or maybe 26.5. Then it was 27.5, and now it's 28. So the spread's continuing to grow. Why? I have no clue. I know not Central, but Western Michigan lost to Syracuse by 40 points. But Syracuse and Dino Babers and Garrett Schrader are going to run up the score. They did that last year despite being 7-6. That's not Iowa's style of football. So 27 Hawkeyes, 7 Broncos. Now this is an entertaining game. A game that I wanted to get to this week, but unfortunately I didn't have the time. So I'm probably going to spend a few more seconds talking about this game. Tennessee has not won at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium since 2003. They're favored by 6 points. I think that Florida will cover that, almost certainly. Graham Mertz, as bad as he is, I hate to say it, but there is a chance that he's better this year than he was at Wisconsin, though I don't think he's as good as many advertise him to be. Utah was without several starters. Clearly, once they got up by 2 or 3 touchdowns, they took their foot off the gas. He got garbage time yards. Like, all of his yards against Utah were essentially in garbage time. He had 50 passing attempts, 300 passing yards, and Florida's defense, too, was very vulnerable. And against Utah, they're a good team. I think Utah's a top 10 team, at worst a top 15 team. But nonetheless, that was an embarrassing showing in which the score and statistics will deceive you into thinking that Florida played Utah closer, much closer than they actually did. This is a tough game. I expect Florida to fire on all cylinders. I don't think Tennessee will play to their A-plus potential. However, the Volunteers are the better team. Let's not get that mistaken. They have the better defense. They have the better run game. Jalen Wright and Jabari Small, their running backs, are great. I mean, Tennessee right now is averaging 257.5 rushing yards per game. It's incredible. And their leading rusher, Jalen Wright, is averaging nearly 10 yards per carry. I don't know if he'll average that against Florida, but if he does, Florida's dead. I think Tennessee will run for over 200 yards. And Joe Milton, he has not been impressive in his first 2 games, not as impressive as I thought. But one thing he's kept constant with, against small opponents, he does not turn over the football. And all he has to do, in my mind, for Tennessee to... If Tennessee doesn't turn the football over, I think they have a guaranteed win here. And I don't think Joe Milton will turn over the football. I don't like Florida's defense. I don't like Florida's offense. What I do like is the Swamp. It's a night game. However, outside of that, and maybe, dare I say it, quarterback, though I don't think so, Florida has no advantage. And on roster and on staff, they certainly have no significant advantage. I think that Tennessee wins. Florida covers. If Florida wins this game, though, I will not be surprised. I think Tennessee is vastly overrated where they are, and history is against Tennessee here. And while history is history, and sometimes it doesn't matter, it can also be a good indicator for success and or failure. I think Tennessee will win in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium for the first time since 2003, but it will be a tight game, and it's closer to a pick'em game than a game in which there is a clear-cut favorite, at least from my perspective. Up next, this is another game that I wanted to preview this week because I have a large Nebraska fan base. They're very loyal to me. Even more so, they're loyal to their team. And their team has sucked, quite frankly. Their offense has been non-existent in their past 2 games, only scoring a combined 24 points against Minnesota and Colorado. Now, against Minnesota, that's, understandable. Minnesota's a great defense. Nebraska's strength is running the football, and because of 4 turnovers and inexcusable mistakes by Jeff Sims and by Nebraska's staff, they could only score 14 against Colorado, and 7 of those points came within the final seconds of the fourth quarter. This team has been disappointing. They're favored to win by 11. The game is at home. I expect there to be less false starts and more discipline as a result of this home game. And Corn Crazed said that in his video, and I thought, well, that's a good point, and it is. I think Nebraska here is too talented to... I think they're too talented to lose in a blowout like they did against Colorado, and I think they're too talented here to choke a big lead against a team like Northern Illinois, who lost to Southern Illinois, an FCS team. However, in the instance where Northern Illinois is able to run the football, establish an identity, and where Rocky Lombardi can play at his ceiling, this game can become a dogfight. I think both teams will commit 2 or more turnovers, but Nebraska will have the better running game, they have the home field advantage, and they have the much better defense. Statistics may not indicate that, but like Mark Twain said, there are 3 kinds of lies. Lies, darn lies, he didn't say darn, but you can fill in the blank, and statistics. And for Nebraska, their defense has allowed 252.5 yards per game, nearly 300 passing, most of those to Shedeur Sanders in Colorado, and their secondary has had some anti-clutch moments, but more of that's due to the nature of Nebraska's offense constantly giving the defense short fields to guard. Nebraska's only allowed 56.5 rushing yards. This defense is good. Right now they have 9 sacks, if not more than that. And I think the Huskers will earn their first win of the 2023 season by a score of 24-13. That is an 11-point game, so it's not that they fail to cover or they cover, rather they push, winning by 11. It's so difficult for me to pick Nebraska to win and cover here or to win but play in a much tighter game. I think that Nebraska is so talented. At some point, even with their woes at quarterback, they have to come through. Watch for Heinrich Haarberg to potentially start over Jeff Sims. And speaking of quarterback switches, Tyler Buchner is going to be starting against South Florida, and Jalen Milroe will be benched, which hurts my feelings because I think Milroe's the better quarterback, and I think that even though Buchner is mobile, he isn't as talented as Milroe, and that might help them not turn over the football. But I don't like Buchner either. I think that Alabama's quarterback room is just in a horrible position, and I don't think they're capable of reaching the playoff now. It's just a brief thought of mine. Potentially, but I don't think so, an overreaction. I try not to overreact here, and I think I do a pretty good job. However, between Alabama and Texas, that's a big game. We know more about Alabama and Texas because they're talented and they played each other, which means they played good competition. So we know more about those teams than we do perhaps Georgia or Michigan or Ohio State or Penn State, who have not played anyone remotely close to their level. And I think it's safe to say that Texas has a much higher ceiling than Alabama, and they also have a higher floor, in part because I think they have the better play caller on offense, Steve Sarkisian. They have better trench play, and they have the better quarterback, no doubt about that. Syracuse and Purdue. Last year, this game was a defensive mud fight, and then in the fourth quarter, both offenses went off, and Syracuse ended up winning. This time, Syracuse travels to Ross-Ade Stadium. They're favored by 2.5 points. I think Purdue wins, and they come out with a tight home win. Ross-Ade Stadium is a tough place to play. I think Hudson Card will throw for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns. Him and Garrett Schrader and the passing attacks of both schools will be utilized more and will be more important than the run games. I think that Syracuse, they haven't played tough competition. They have played Western Michigan, and they have also played Colgate. Now, of course, if, let's say, Georgia or Michigan were playing against, let's say, Nebraska having faced tougher competition, I wouldn't use that same standard to pick Nebraska to beat Georgia and Michigan. Nebraska would get blown out by Georgia and Michigan by multiple touchdowns. That game would be over probably by halftime. However, Purdue and Syracuse are much closer in caliber of play. They are far closer. And Purdue lost to Fresno State by 4. They beat Virginia Tech on the road by 7, and they controlled that game pretty well. I think that Syracuse, part of it is a feeling, but last year they started off, they looked good. I was very cautious about ranking them highly, and then they collapsed after losing to Clemson. I just don't think Dino Babers is a good coach. I think that Ryan Walters, actually right now, even though he's in his first year, is a much better head coach than Dino Babers. I think Purdue wins 31-28. Ryan Walters picks up his second Power 5 win of his career, and he hasn't even played in the Big Ten Conference yet. So this game I think will be close. This might be one of the more entertaining games of the week, despite neither team being in the top 25. And then finally, Colorado State and Jay Norvell, who was talking trash about how Deion acts in his press conferences, they traveled the road to Folsom Field, where Colorado was favored by 24, and believe me, that spread is growing, to take on Coach Prime and Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter and Dylan Edwards, and a team that, in my mind, is built to slice and dice teams that don't have as good of talent as they do. I think that Colorado, despite having many flaws, is going to win and cover here. 42-17 is my prediction. I think that the Buffalo's defense is vulnerable enough to where Colorado State might make this a game for a half, and they will find ways to get points and expose weaknesses. But Shedeur Sanders and Xavier Weaver, Jimmy Horn Jr., and Travis Hunter, him and his wide receiver core and running back Dylan Edwards and Sean Lewis's play caller, a Colorado State defense I have a hard time believing will stop this offense. Now, there are games where I think upsets are possible. Michigan State over Washington, Illinois over Penn State I have a harder time believing in, but it's still possible. And there are others as well, like Florida over Tennessee. This game, I think, could be an upset, but I'm not going to predict it. I think that what Jay Norvell said about Deion Sanders is a mistake. Is it his preference about how he addresses the media? Yes, but you don't want to give this team fuel to the fire, especially when this is one of the few teams on Colorado's schedule where, from a team talent composite point of view, they are far more talented than their opponent. That is going to result in a massive defeat. But to go back to Colorado's team talent, because they only have, they have stacked players at certain positions, and then, like, for example, in the trenches, they don't have very many good players except their offensive center. This is a type of game where I could see a letdown, but I'm not going to predict it. I could see it, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Colorado will be 3-0, and because of their style of play, I'm telling you, there is a good chance that between Oregon or USC, they could beat one of those teams, because those offenses, that's track meet style football. And what does Colorado and Deion Sanders and Sean Lewis excel at? Track meet football. Their antidote is a team like Oregon State or like Nebraska if they actually had a competent quarterback and didn't turn the ball over. So Colorado wins big, 42-17. Colorado is one of those teams where they find ways to win, They're efficient. I have nothing but praise for Deion Sanders after he proved me wrong in the first 2 games. So this is going to be a great week of college football, I think. And this is the final game of my quick picks video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe and like this video and comment your thoughts down below if you haven't already. And hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I publish more preview videos like this one. I want to give a quick shout out to my patrons, Spencer Bringhurst, my All-American, and Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, and Matthew Sale, my all-conference patrons. Thank you for supporting this channel, and if you haven't checked out my Patreon yet, please do via the link in the description. There will be picks for winners of games and also picks against the spread, many of which will be games featured in this video and in my preview videos, posted on Patreon tomorrow, along with some quick thoughts and other bonus content throughout the future. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you all around. Have a great day. Bye-bye.